third month and the last one of this third month, last one. Um, this one is about hypothalamic hamartoma, and hamartoma, as you all know, is a non-malignant tumor. It's made of an abnormal mixture of the normal tissue itself from where it grows. But the importance, I thought, was it's very rare, of course. The incidence is said to be around 1 to 2 per 100,000. And all of us know that it causes gelastic seizures, and that's it. So whether some child comes with gelastic seizures, and it's pretty much well under control, whether to take up the surgery, seeing uh, the bright tumor sitting in the tuberosynarium or at the core of the third ventricle is a question which we always face. And often we mistake seizures for the epilepsy which they have. One should understand that the incidence of epilepsy is only 1 in 200,000, so it's very, very rare. They forming in what you call an epilepsy syndrome. So that's why we thought of putting up this particular topic. And this will be dealt under two headings. One is the clinical presentations and epileptogenesis by Dr. Suresh Babu. He again is an alumnus of Chitra, did his PDF here. And then he's now in Krishna Institute of Medical Sciences along with Sridhar Jayalakshmi. And that is the first speaker, and the second one who's smiling there you can see. He keeps smiling, that is Sunish, and he is in Rajagiri Hospital. Am I right, Sunish? I always confuse the various hospitals in Kochi. Yeah, he just graduated from here. That is, he did his postdoctoral fellowship a couple of years ago. That means last year, sorry. And then comes Chandra, who again was a DIMHANS alumni who joined Chitra for doing his postdoctoral fellowship, and then he will be wrapping up the whole thing. So we thought we'll put it as a great masquerader because of various reasons which we are going to hear from these people very soon. I request all of you to keep up your time. 20 minutes means at 18 minutes, preferably you can stop. That doesn't mean again you should rush through the whole thing and then leave the chair to take up the next 10 minutes. So welcome, and Dr. Suresh can start now.
Can I start, ma'am?
Yeah, you can start now.
Good evening, ma'am, and good evening to everyone. And today I am speaking about the hypothalamic hamartoma, its clinical presentations, and the epileptogenesis. And this is one of the fascinating topic for the epileptologist to understand how the secondary epileptogenesis and the ways of spread from the primary focus to the secondary focus, and how the small lesions can lead to the devastating epilepsy, which can mimic like originating from the different areas. And it is a hypothalamic hematomas are the intrinsically epileptogenic, and these hematomas are the congenital malformations of the ventral hypothalamus. If you see the microarchitecture of the hematoma, they are relatively a simple and nodular cluster of the neurons. They vary in size and abundance with poorly defined boundaries. If you see most of these neurons, around 80 to 90% of the neurons, they look like interneurons. They have a very small rounded soma and short unbranched fibers. They express the GABA as their neurotransmitter, and they have an intrinsic pacemaker-like activity, and this pacemaker-like activity will determines the epileptogenicity of that network. With relatively short and simple processes, it appears likely that their network interactions are largely within the neuronal clusters. And remaining population, around 10 to 20% of the population of the neurons they are the projection neurons, which use the excitatory neurotransmitter, and these large fibers determines the propagation to the either to the frontal lobe or temporal lobe, like it is like a lateral spread or the vertical spread, was determined by these large neurons. And these neurons are actually functionally immature, and with depolarization and the firing in response to the GABA ligands. Means GABA is like a excitatory for these large neurons. These large neurons are the projection neurons, and these projection neurons will determine the way of spread of the epileptogenic activity from the hypothalamic hematoma. And the large number of spontaneously firing small interneurons, we know that they have an intrinsic pacemaker-like activity, which results in the paradoxical excitement of the large pyramidal neurons, which constitute the 10 to 20% of the population, contributing to an increase in the excitation required for any epileptic network. So what we can understand from this one is hypothalamic hematomas have a 80 to 90% of the pacemaker-like interneuronal cells. They use the GABA as a neurotransmitter, and there are a 10 to 20% of the large projection neurons. They release the glutamate as a neurotransmitter, and they are large fibers are excitatory with the GABA. They behave differently from the other neurons. These irregular neuronal clusters form the large and small neurons, forms the functional unit for a ictogenesis. And hypothalamic hematomas that connect to the posterior hypothalamus in the region of the mammillary bodies are associated with epilepsy, usually with gelastic seizures that begin during infancy. The hypothalamic hematomas that connect to the anterior hypothalamus in the region of the tuber cinereum have a central precocious puberty. So from this we can see that
Suresh, we can't hear you.
The network issue. Okay, Suresh, we can't hear you.
Please call it up.
Yeah, call.
the posterior
Okay, Suresh, unmute yourself and unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I am moving to the clinical features associated with the hypothalamic hematomas, common gelastic seizures and the other seizure types, endocrine abnormalities, and the cognitive and the behavioral disturbances. The gelastic seizures are the gelastic seizures and hypothalamic hematoma syndrome is one of the most fascinating syndromes in epileptology. Hypothalamic hematomas results in distinctive epilepsy syndrome featuring a spectrum of clinical manifestations showing a variable severity and evolution. As the duration of the epilepsy increases, the presentation of the hematoma will change. The seizure semiology and the other associated features will change. Gelastic seizures are the distinctive seizure type and is the first symptom in most of the patients with the hypothalamic hematoma. And the gelastic seizures are characterized by stereotypic recurrence of ictal laughter, inadapted to the context, associated with other signs compatible with seizures and with the ictal and interictal EEG abnormalities. Gelastic seizures tends to be overall less frequent in the older patients, and about 75% of the patients with gelastic seizures and hypothalamic hematoma will develop other seizure types, most commonly a focal seizures with frontal or the temporal lobe onset. It depends upon the propagation from the hypothalamic hematoma. This is probably dependent on the tight connections of the hematoma with the mammillary bodies, which spreads commonly to the temporal lobe, or to the medial hypothalamus, which spreads towards the frontal lobe. Other than the gelastic seizures, the only two main seizure types were seen. One is a complex partial seizure and other one is a tonic seizures. The tonic seizures can be a symmetric or the asymmetric tonic seizures that depends upon the spread to the supplementary motor area. The seizure spread pattern were limited to the two types. Either gelastic seizures could progress to either to the complex partial or to the tonic seizures. And we will not see combination of the complex partial seizures and the tonic seizures. And both seizure types could evolve to the secondary generalized seizures. And categorically, we can divide into the two syndromes from the hypothalamic hematoma. And one syndrome consists of the more favorable profile. It is a gelastic seizure associated with the clinical EEG features of medically refractory temporal lobe epilepsy with preserved cognition and which was associated with the smaller lesions. So means it shows that a smaller lesion in the hypothalamus could mimic clinically and electrophysiologically like a temporal lobe epilepsy. And the second syndrome consists of the catastrophic epileptic syndrome with the GS, gelastic seizures, and associated with the other seizure types that indicate a symptomatic generalized epilepsy syndrome, commonly a tonic seizures, atonic seizures, atypical absences, and associated with the cognitive decline. The typical catastrophic evolution towards the secondary generalized LGS, atypical absences, atonic, mainly sleep-related tonic, tonic-clonic seizures are usually observed. The occurrence of the infantile spasms and electrical status epilepticus during the sleep is rare. So, overall, like a hypothalamic emission is a gelastic seizure, or to the early you will see the infantile spasms and the ESES presentation. There are two types of the spread. Commonly, we will see the hypothalamic hematoma, and one is a vertical spread pattern involving a deep midline structures and the frontal lobe structures, including the supplementary motor area, is associated with a more severe epilepsy syndrome and the cognitive deterioration, suggestive of the symptomatic generalized epilepsy. The lateral spread pattern to the temporal lobe determines a more benign syndrome of a focal pseudotemporal lobe epilepsy. And hypothalamic hematoma, ictal propagation pathway starts with the seizures generated in hematoma, then spread to the either downstream areas like a anterior thalamus, hippocampus, occipitotemporal junction, and other specific areas. Sometimes it spreads to the frontal. And the second clinical manifestation is a precocious puberty. The central precocious puberty related to ectopic gonadotropin releasing hormone neurons. About 40% of the patients with neurological features develop a precocious puberty during their clinical course. Very few patients with the endocrine dysfunction, which commonly a lesion near the puber cinerarium, shows the neurological involvement. The difference could be related at least in part to the high frequency of the pedunculated hematomas in endocrine patients and of a sessile hematomas in a neurologic patients. And the third manifestation is cognitive and the behavioral disturbances. Children with gelastic seizures and hypothalamic hematoma are cognitively normal before epilepsy. They often develop the behavioral and psychiatric features which correlate with the epilepsy severity and the occurrence of the EEG abnormalities. And the large spectrum of a severity of the cognitive deficits has been described, typically including a major behavioral problems with pervasive developmental and attention deficit disorder associated with aggression, rage attacks, and hyperactivity. The most frequent psychiatric diagnosis among adults is a major depression and anxiety disorders, and more rarely psychosis or the severe personality disorders. If you see the next, I am moving to the interictal and the ictal EEG findings. And like till now we saw the histology of the hypothalamus, and next we move to the clinical features, gelastic and other seizure types, and the second is a endocrine abnormality, third one is a cognitive and behavioral problems. And the interictal and ictal EEG findings are EEG is normal in children with gelastic seizures, and as it progresses and evolving to the other seizure types, and you can see the sometimes it can be a frontal spike, sometimes temporal spikes, depends on the spread of the epileptogenic activity, or it can be a multifocal spikes. If you are seeing the multifocal spikes, it is more suggestive of the involvement of the neocortical areas, secondary and the secondary epileptogenesis. As the severity increases, you can initially, when you are following the children to the adult life, initially they may not have any interictal discharges. As the severity increases, the spike index will increase. There will be a sleep activation and the secondary bilateral synchrony of the interictal discharges. And it depends upon the spread. Is it a vertical spread or the lateral spread? If it is spread more to the frontal, it can lead to the LGS and shows the continuous spike and wave discharges. If it is to the temporal, it looks like a temporal lobe epilepsy. Patients with the gelastic seizures and complex partial seizures presented a more benign profile with the preserved cognition and the clinical EEG features of the temporal epilepsy. Patients with the gelastic seizures and the tonic gelastic seizures with the tonic seizures had a clinical EEG features of the symptomatic generalized epilepsy and including the mental deterioration. And the EEG and the ictal effect findings suggest that all seizures in hypothalamic hematoma related epilepsy originate in the hypothalamic hematoma, one resembling the temporal lobe epilepsy, other resembling the secondary generalized epilepsy. And one more interesting thing to learn from the hypothalamic hematoma was a epileptogenesis beyond the lesion. It is the secondary epileptogenesis could be defined as a induction of the epileptic activities in the cellular elements of a previously normal neuronal network by an interconnected, actively discharging epileptogenic area. Morel postulated 3 stages of the secondary epileptogenesis. The first stage, epileptiform discharges detected in the secondary focus were driven by a primary focus. Removal of the primary epileptogenic area resulted in the immediate cessation of the epileptogenic discharges in the secondary epileptogenic area. In the second stage, independent interictal discharges and later independent seizures was detected in the secondary focus. They initially persisted after the removal of the primary focus, but eventually there is a rundown in the seizure frequency and they disappear. In a third stage, epileptiform activity in the secondary epileptogenic area persisted after the removal of the primary focus without running down phenomena. So like it depends upon the selection, how early you are selecting. For example, hypothalamic hematoma with less than 10 years of the seizure duration will be like either in the stage 1 or stage 2. If it is more than 10 years, it is more likely that there will be a no running down phenomena and they are the actual independent focus. A large part of kindling was related to the involvement of the cingulate gyrus, and a lot of focus was shifted to the cingulate gyrus in hypothalamic hematoma. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Suresh. In the interest of time, I think we'll complete the other two and then come back and take the questions. Thank you so much. It was very clear. Um, I thought you would be speaking a bit about the MRI classification and the MRI differential diagnosis as well. I don't know whether Sunish is going to do that or Chandra. Let's hear from Sunish now. Yes, Sunish.
So Suresh has to stop streaming.
Yeah, Suresh. Yes. Chandra or Suresh, if Suresh is not speaking, can keep that answer ready. Um, how can sometimes the large hypothalamic lesions may extend into the pituitary fossa and the paracellular region? Then you have the confusion whether it's a pituitary adenoma with a supracellular extension. That is what the neurosurgeon always faces. So, how to distinguish? And there is a radiological classification as well, whereby the neurosurgeon decides how to go about the surgery. So, just be ready with both the answers so that we can hear from Sunish and then get back to you. Yes, Sunish. So, this is when to tackle and when to leave the lesion.
Okay. Good evening. I'm going to discuss regarding the management, mainly management part of the hypothalamic hematoma. That is when to tackle and when to leave. So, as Dr. Suresh explained about the different spectrum of the hypothalamic hematoma, it can range from benign spectrum of hypothalamic hematoma to the catastrophic epilepsy with cognitive symptoms. So this is a study regarding the benign spectrum of the hypothalamic hematoma. They followed the patients who came to the endocrine department. So most of the patient had central precocious puberty. Only minority of the patient had seizures. And on follow-up, they didn't develop much of the cognitive symptoms. So this signifies that the hypothalamic hematoma is a spectrum of disorders ranging from benign to malignant spectrum with refractory epilepsy with cognitive dysfunction. So as already discussed, the main three problems associated with hypothalamic hematoma is epilepsy and cognitive problems and endocrine dysfunction. So the key points in the management of the hypothalamic hematoma are about the most of the seizures are resistant to medications. AEDs regimens used for the seizures are mainly for the focal seizures regime, and it's mainly targets for the convulsive seizures. And there is a risk of evolution to multiple seizures and significant cognitive and behavioral impairment is common, and subtle undiagnosed endocrine dysfunction has to be addressed and requires early referral for a surgical assessment. The most important challenge is making an accurate diagnosis of the hypothalamic hematoma. So most of the time, this gelastic seizures are missed because most of the patient who comes with cognitive problems, most of them will have that gelastic component that may be mistaken for the emotional, only the way of the emotional expression. So most of the time it will be missed. So seizures are most common presentation in 61% of patients, and precocious puberty at presentation was seen in 66%, and evidence of both was 25%. So the most important part in the management is mainly is the diagnosis. Suspect all patients with cognitive decline with some gelastic component. Appropriate MRI sequence is required. That's axial coronal T2, axial coronal and sagittal T1 and spin echo post contrast. It will be a non-enhancing lesion. And as already Suresh mentioned, this EEG in the initial stage often may be normal and change over time to epileptic. It can change multifocal or features of epileptic encephalopathy. And the etiology is often sporadic, and sometimes it may be associated with Pallister-Hall syndrome, that is an autosomal dominant syndrome associated with polydactyly imperforate anus, is associated with GL3 mutation. Sometimes the somatic mutation of sonic hedgehog pathway is also associated with hypothalamic hamartoma. So coming to the initiation of the treatment, because of rarity of this syndrome, evidence base for the optimal anticonvulsant is limited. The usual protocol for epilepsy is mainly the protocol for the focal epilepsy. The commonly used drugs are carbamazepine, lamotrigine, and the sonizumab showed some benefit. And most of the data has surgical centers bias. So individualized decision based on risk benefit ratio is required. Aim is to minimize the progression to the convulsive seizures. Most of the time, gelastic and diachrystic seizures are resistant to therapy. So data favoring the medical therapy is restricted. So and the data favoring which alters the natural history of the syndrome is also limited. So there is no data whether anticonvulsant therapy can alter the natural history. Coming to the why seizures are so drug resistant. This is a study showed stereo EEG showed the genesis of gelastic seizures. Here they found that, as already mentioned, this gelastic seizures arise from the substance of the hypothalamic hamartoma. So the question arises whether it is due to poor penetration or the mode of action is irrelevant to this lesion. So they found that GABA A receptor mediated activation of L-type calcium channels induces neuronal excitation in surgical resected human hypothalamic hamartomas. So the option of the theoretical medicine as an nifedipine to block these channels that modulate high frequency oscillation in the tissue, but it is not translated into the clinical practice. Other option was tried was ketogenic diet. In 220 patients, 10 of the patients they retrospectively checked for the effectiveness of ketogenic diet. They found one patient was benefited, and around 4 to 5 patients was had a 50 to 96% reduction of the seizure frequency. And coming to the beyond seizures, what's the that is regarding the endocrinopathy and progressive cognitive and behavioral problems. Regarding the and hypothalamic hamartoma with epilepsy, the most commonly found the endocrine abnormalities were central precocious puberty, reduced growth velocity in relation to the height trajectory, and secondary TSH and TRH deficiency leading to hypothyroidism, metabolic syndrome, life-threatening ACTH deficiency, and central diabetes insipidus is rare, mostly seen after post-operative period. So coming to the guidelines of the management, so the most important thing is the high degree of suspicion for diagnosing the hypothalamic hamartoma, and referral to a specialist surgical center is required, and careful follow-up and appropriate medical and surgical decision is important, and look for response to medications. Most of the time, gelastic and diagnostic seizures are resistant to medications. So it's not unreasonable to consider holding medicines. So AEDs is better to use for other seizure types like convulsive seizures. And those who have refractory seizures and cognitive problems, early resection and ablation is the most important one. It is mainly used for other types of seizures. So what's foreseen in future? That there is mainly lots of surgical bias. Yeah, because of the exceptional rarity, this multi-central, multi-professional effort is required to maintain a hypothalamic hamartoma registry to decide whom will be benefited and whom it may be avoided. So coming to the conclusion part of the management of the hypothalamic hamartoma. Hypothalamic hamartoma with epilepsy is a management challenge. Most important challenge is to diagnosing the hypothalamic hamartoma, because it's very rare and most of the time gelastic seizures are missed. Accurate early diagnosis is the most important, and trial of AED, selection based protocols for focal seizures, and as already discussed, this calcium channel blockers deserves further RCTs to know the effectiveness. Monitoring of the cognitive and behavior functions and the support system for the the behavioral support is also required, and endocrine assessment is mandatory. So the coming to the first question, that when to tackle. So most of the patients coming with central precocious puberty, they are managed medically with the GnRH agonist therapy. Most of them, those who are presented with only with endocrine abnormality or single unprovoked seizures, may not develop cognitive problems, so they can be managed medically with the GnRH agonist. Only the patients with endocrine abnormality, surgical therapy is indicated only those who cannot afford the GnRH therapy or those who develop intolerance to the medication. And the neurological indication was refractory seizures and progressive cognitive issues and epileptic encephalopathy. So when to leave the hypothalamic hamartoma. So patient with the benign spectrum, as already discussed, those comes with only endocrinopathy or a single unprovoked seizures can be managed conservatively. So only with patient with only with endocrinopathy and without endocrinopathy or a single seizures or without cognitive impairment, we can manage conservatively. We can leave the hamartoma, but monitoring is always required to progression of the catastrophic epilepsy syndrome.
Okay, Sanish, thank you so much. I think there was a simplified version, and better that you didn't go into the surgical techniques and all.
Yes.
That was not the mandate of the
Okay.
today's talk. And Chandra can start now.
Somebody is sharing. I can't share the screen.
Sanish, close yours.
Shall I start?
Yes, Chandra, please.
Good evening, everybody. Okay,
Oh, we
outside
can't
I
see
like
your
to.
screen.
Good evening, everybody. At the outset, I'd like to thank ma'am for giving me this opportunity. Today's speakers have exhaustively covered both the topics. And I'd like to just summarize it and probably add about the surgical outcome. As you all know that these hypothalamic hematomas are a very rare congenital malformation. Most of them are sporadic, and they do grow according to the proportion of the brain, but they don't outgrow or spread. This is a very important point compared which is useful in the management. And basically, according to the attachment to the hypothalamus, radiologically there are two types, sessile and pedunculated. The sessile one, which we usually encounter, which is attached at the level of the medullary body, which have epilepsy with behavioral problems. And the pedunculated one usually attached at the level of tuber cinereum with a stalk, which have usually the central precocious puberty, and rarely they are associated with seizures. Coming to the clinical manifestations, they're widely varied. Those with early onset, they have the gelastic seizures, and 75% of them, they progress to multiple seizure type, and some they progress to catastrophic epileptic encephalopathy, mimicking LGS. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, you can see the milder form, wherein the onset would be in childhood or adolescence, and they have very subtle laughing seizures, wherein they have a pressure to laugh. And they associated various cognitive problems in around 60% of the patients, predominantly visual, verbal memories, learning problems, and significant behavioral problems in around 88 to 90% of the patients. These are usually this unprovoked rage, this ADHD, anxiety, depression, various other behavioral problems, bedwetting, and they also have this delay in motor development with problems with the balance and coordination, incoordination. This is further added by the AADs, and central precocious puberty with various endocrinopathies. As mentioned by the earlier speaker, EEG and video EEG has limited utility in the early stages. As you seen in this study, the ictal EEG produced no changes in around 75% of the patients in gelastic seizures. And as the seizures evolve, epilepsy evolve, the multifocal spiking as generalized spiking is seen, but it's not much used in localizing or lateralizing. So best would be the MRI, wherein the classification is done by Delande. Actually, I not made the slide. There's 4 stages. Stage 1 is, it all depends on the plane of attachment to the floor of the third ventricle, how the hamartoma is attached. Wherein if they have stage 1 is their horizontal attachment, and stage 2 is vertical attachment. Stage 3 is both horizontal and vertical. Stage 4 is a huge, gigantic lesion. Coming to epileptogenesis, this is proven beyond doubt that the hamartomas are intrinsically epileptogenic. This we can see either physiologically, this wherein stereo EEG, the ictal onset was proven that it's well localized to the hypothalamic hamartoma, as well as these gelastic seizures were again replicated by the direct stimulation, and there was significant seizure reduction post resection or ablation of this. The other way of looking at it is Cassino et al. They reported very disappointing results with respect to seizure outcome when they did multiple temporal or frontal resections without doing any depth electrode monitoring. All this points towards the hypothalamic hamartoma being epileptogenic. This is also supported by the functional imaging by SPECT or PET, just to show that this one depth recording, wherein the ictal onset is very well localized to the hamartoma lead, which is placed in the hamartoma, and only over a period of time it spreads to the cingulate gyrus. The other supportive evidences are the SPECT showing hyperperfusion, ictal SPECT, as well as the ictal PET showing hypermetabolism in the hamartoma. And the concept of secondary epileptogenesis has been extensively explained by the earlier speaker, wherein the secondary foci is being formed in neocortices based on the connections. It could be temporal or it could be frontal. Temporal usually from the mammillothalamic tract, in the frontal usually along the cingulate fasciculus. Even the histopathological findings have been extensively explained, so I'll not be dealing with this. Coming to the management, usually a multidisciplinary team is required, and here basically we need to add the pediatric endocrinologist for pre-surgical evaluation as well as the post during the monitoring also. And as you all know that gelastic epilepsy is usually resistance to all the drugs, and other seizure types have mild to moderate success. So when to tackle this? Predominantly they are those who become drug resistant with multiple seizure types which are very disabling and associated progressive cognitive or developmental deterioration. So aim of the pre-surgical planning should be to resect completely or to disconnect the lesion completely from the mammillary bodies, that is along, it spreads along the temporal lobe, or medial hypothalamus which spreads along the frontal lobe. This picture showing the transcallosal interpharyngeal approach. This is the one surgical approach which has the highest field, wherein through the corpus callosum, you are through in between the interferences, you are approaching the amalgama, wherein a direct view, unobscured view is seen, and these are very useful for resecting relatively larger lesions which are above the level of the optic nerve. This table summarizes the various modalities which have been used. The transcallosal interferential approach, which I explained just now, see, all the modalities have advantages as well as disadvantages. Here it has the highest seizure freedom. Around Engel class 1 is around some 55% to 60%. And the side effect with this is because we are going to retract the phonesis, the memory, short-term memory impairment is the most important side effect here. The pterional usually is advisable for interpendicular one, larger one, where predominantly they come with precocious puberty, and the endoscopic disconnection, that is through the ventricle, transventricular endoscopic, either resection or disconnection is done, wherein the seizure freedom is around 50%. The advantage is a short post-op period, and here we are not disturbing the fornix. And gamma knife radiosurgery, the seizure freedom is around 37 to 40%. The only problem here is the onset of action. It takes around some 6 to 12 months, sometimes even up to 24 months. So there is a delay here. So here we need to select patients who are adolescents or adults who have intact memory and milder epilepsy. So those who can wait for the onset of action, but not those with progressive epilepsies. And radiofrequency thermoablation, so isolated case reports, where they're showing promising reports around 70%. But the disadvantage here is there is imprecise volume of the tissue which is ablated, and there are multiple trajectories and multiple times a probe needs to be passed. So there is a chances of this damaging the adjacent structures. And finally, the combined modalities needs to be kept in mind because either you resect and then you disconnect, either you disconnect and resect, or use a gamma knife then you resect, is the option which needs to be kept. So what are the final observations I could make is the exact surgical anatomy of each case would determine the safest and the best approach. And the complete seizure freedom, Engel class 1 is seen in around 55% of the cases in transcallosal approach, and in another 25 to 34%, 90% reductions was seen. And the gelastic and focal seizures usually they cease immediately or post-op period, and the tonic-atonic seizures they usually persist for a few months and then subside, suggesting running down phenomenon, wherein suggests that there is erosion of the secondary epileptogenesis. And most important point is those who do well are those when the intervention is done at younger age, less than 8 years, shorter duration of epilepsy, less than 7 years, smaller volume, and complete resection. And they also noted that the non-gelastic type, especially tonic, other seizure types, and developmental delay as a negative outcome with respect to seizure freedom. The other important aspect of this surgical intervention is the significant behavioral improvement, usually seen it in the first few weeks of surgery, as well as cognitive improvement. Some of the complications which need to be kept in mind are because the chances of thalamic and capsular infarct producing hemiparesis, and optic tract producing visual field deficits, short-term memory impairment, transient diabetes insipidus, hypothyroidism, and in some cases, hydrocephalus. So when not to tackle them? This is in very early stage when they're very brief, infrequent, or non-disabling, or when the child is making very good overall development. And also in advanced stage, wherein stage 3 of secondary epileptogenesis, where there's chances of benefits are very less. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra, for that very crisp concluding remarks. But I don't know whether I'll go with your last point. That is in the, what you said is epileptic encephalopathy. That's what you meant, no? Where you do not want to tackle the lesion. Anyway, yeah, that's what you meant. Or the
Benefits are
large
less.
lesion which occupies the whole of cellular and supracellular region. I did not get that point right because it's very important. You mean to
Yeah.
say that you do not want to tackle it in a case of epileptic encephalopathy? I don't think people will buy it. Can you just
The
confirm
benefits are
that?
less.
Yeah.
The benefits are less, but we need to tackle it. The benefits are less.
Okay. So the benefits after surgery in all the series are not very outstandingly good. So that's fine. So it was nice. And I think there are only one or two questions after that. We'll discuss a bit about it because there are a few points which needs to be clarified. This is from Dr. Kalyani, although she had put it as iPhone, which is a new nickname. And Musaji is here. So Kalyani is also here. How small interneuron-like neurons cause paradoxical excitement of pyramidal tract. Large neurons act excitatory through GABA, but how small ones are excitatory to pyramidal? That's a question. I think this can go to Suresh because he was covering the epileptogenesis. Suresh, please.
Yeah. Pyramidal neurons contain a GABA receptors. They are excitatory for the pyramidal neurons. They behave differently from the other neurons. GABA is not inhibitory. It is excitatory to the large neurons.
Can you make it more clear?
GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter.
Okay.
But in case of hypothalamic hematoma, GABA is excitatory to the large neurons. They behave differently from the other neurons.
So that's how that difference happens.
Yes,
Are you okay with that, Kalyani? Do you want to ask anything further on that?
No, madam. Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is a comment by her. The new method for hypothalamic hamartoma is focused ultrasound therapy. I think we heard it in one of the talks earlier also. I don't remember if it was Joseph or Bijoy. So that is a comment from her. And the next one is, what is the cause of cognitive decline in hypothalamic hamartoma? Who wants to take that? Who did the clinical presentations? I think it was Suresh.
Yeah.
What is the cause of cognitive decline?
I think it's due to the seizure burden because of multiple seizures.
So do you mean to say that children or adults who come with gelastic seizures alone will not have behavioral problems?
Usually in the case series, most of the patients who developing the multiple types of seizures is going to develop this cognitive problems. One of the studies showed single unprovoked seizures or only gelastic seizures. They usually won't develop cognitive problems.
Okay, we'll come to that a little later. This is from Joe James. He is from Medical College Calicut. He is the son of James. Sir. So Joe wants to ask a question. Can gelastic seizures present in adulthood? So one of you can take the question.
Frequency of the gelastic seizures will come down, ma'am, as they grow older.
Okay, so you want the children to grow older with the hypothalamic hamartoma and then the gelastic seizures to come down. Can gelastic seizures present in adulthood is the question. So how much of the adult population presents with gelastic seizures in big series? There are pediatric epileptologists sitting here. We should ask them how much they see. And adult series as such, I don't think it's there. We'll go to Ram, who was working with Simon Harvey, who has done a lot of work in that. But from the Barrow Institute, study and all, they have combined both pediatric and adult groups. That is what I understand. And presenting in adulthood, I think we've seen a couple of patients, but I do not know the exact prevalence, incidence, etc. Can anyone help in the crowd? Anybody? Any of our PDFs? Ram, Dr. Musa, Dr. Rajesh, anybody?
We do see it often in adults as well. I mean, we have had a few patients who seem to have had either grade 2 or grade 3 hypothalamic hamartoma with pseudotemporal epilepsy in adults. We have, I think, as Madam rightly said, we haven't operated many adults. Probably, I think in the last 10 years, maybe 2 adults with hypothalamic hamartoma were operated. One who had pseudotemporal epilepsy and the other had an extratemporal epilepsy. And both, I think, the patient with the pseudotemporal epilepsy was not completely seizure-free post-op, but the one with an extratemporal phenotype was doing well. So that's the limited experience in adults. In the pediatric age group, I think Nandini had presented that series.
Grace,
in
Nandini is there, I think.
epilepsy
Nandini Bitta.
yeah. Nandini had presented in Epilepsy Epilepsy Congress, I think the Indian Epilepsy Congress only. And I think she won a prize for that presentation as well. And the outcomes are to the tune of around 40% in terms of an Engel class 1 outcome with cognitive improvement as well. But I think we found a correlation for only the duration of epilepsy as well as persistence of intrictal epileptiform abnormalities on EEG as predictors of unfavorable postoperative outcome. Completeness of resection was also found to be a factor on univariate, but not on the multivariate analysis. I think perhaps the most important point which emerged in most surgical series was the presence of thalamic disconnection, that is the thalamic interface disconnection. Even if you resect the lesion and leave a part of the thalamic interface with the hypothalamus intact, it is likely that the seizures can propagate or can still persist in the postoperative period. So I think in the Japanese series also there is a fair amount of data which shows that the adequacy of resection of the thalamic interface is an important predictor of postoperative outcome, more than the completeness of resection from the seizure point of view. But then, I mean, in Simon Harvey's series, completeness of resection was found to be a factor. So we are yet to publish our data because that is with the neurosurgeons, and the neurosurgeons have certain technical comments to make on that as well. But I think our limited experience with adults is favorable. And with children, obviously, it is going with what is in terms of the outcome as similar to that seen in international case series.
Yeah, we'll be soon publishing it, and then we'll give you a solid answer. If anybody wanting to add on to that, or anyway, I'll take it with this other question which Musa ji has asked, Dr. Musa has asked. What is the usual surgical strategy or approach for hypothalamic hamartoma at SCTMST? So that is our institute. This is what they are doing it from Matthew's viewpoint. First of all, let me add, it's not to belittle any surgeon or anybody sitting here. There are only few hands in India who can do hypothalamic hamartoma surgery very confidently, that all of you know. And we are thankful to Dr. Matthew, who is not here. I'd asked him to join, but as usual, he's a surgeon. He's not interested in all this nonsense and talking and all. So his preferred approach is a transcallosal transconitial approach. And he has done it both straight as a surgery and with the endoscope. And when we used an endoscope some 5 or 6 years back, we were using an endoscopic approach. We found that when the fornix is too much crushed by the endoscope, the memory impairment was so much so that we had to refrain from using that. Having said that, he prefers a pterional approach as well. And these are the 2 preferred ones. Of course, we don't have any experience with laser or ultrasound therapy. So a comparison between all the surgical approaches is what the surgeon is doing right now, and then we'll come out with a publication which is long due. So that raises the next question. What is the role of mTOR inhibitors in these hamartomas, which somebody wants to know? That is my senior resident. Is there a role of mTOR inhibitors in the treatment of hypothalamic hamartoma? Even I'm very perplexed with that question. So one of you can take it if you know that. If you do not know any question, you should be bold enough to say that we haven't read or we do not know, or we'll go and read. So any of you who knows that the mTOR inhibitors have any role in this one? I haven't. Uh, uh, is there anybody in the crowd who wants to help? Anyone? Has anybody read about the role of mTOR inhibitors? I don't know. So I think we go and find it out.
I think it is, madam. I think it is the sonic hedgehog pathway which is more implicated
That's true.
in
Oh,
hypothalamic hamartoma. So
oh,
I'm not sure about mTOR inhibitors having an
I don't
impact
know.
on the sonic hedgehog pathway.
So I think we'll go and read about it, all of us. Maybe he has read it somewhere. It's from a senior resident of mine. Um, what is your experience with radiosurgery is Gopal's question. See, Gopal, as far as I remember, Ram can correct me if I'm wrong, we had even recently two patients, one patient at least, who had underwent a radiosurgery and who failed. I mean, there was no improvement. Rather, the child went in for an epileptic encephalopathy and came to us with a big lesion for a surgical resection. And I think in January we did the resection. So as far as I know now, because of COVID related issues, he's not turned up for the 3 monthly visit, but the child is doing well. He is from Andhra Pradesh, I mean, uh, close to Hyderabad. So that is our only experience. We don't send patients for radiosurgery per se, although we have had discussions on that in a PMC, but we haven't referred anyone, not because of any particular reason, because the surgeon is quite confident that he can take out the lesion. So these are the questions which I have here, but Ram, will you please take that question of how the radiological yes, Musaji, you have come up on screen, so you want to say something. Yeah, please. Your Cleveland
There is nothing.
experience.
Thank you for having this session. I think I learned a few new things about the connectivity, the spread patterns in the hypothalamic hamartoma. As highlighted, it's a very rare condition. Historically, Cleveland Clinic has not dealt with hypothalamic hamartoma for a very, very long time. We have always referred our patients to Barrows Institute. As he said, this is a very very high risk area. And if people are more comfortable being there for a longer time, probably the risks are less. So to minimize any risks, we have always referred these patients to Barrow. I think Barrow's epilepsy team kind of got dismantled sometime back, and then they are putting it together. So it's still, I have had only one hypothalamic hamartoma in my years as staff here. And that patient, we did a laser therapy. We did a laser therapy, and laser therapy seemed to work very well, but I was really scared when I saw the immediate post-op MRI scan. There was a lot of white matter hyperintensity in the brain stem. You know, we talk about mammillary body, we talk about fornix, hypothalamus, optic chiasma, brain stem is close by. He had a subtle facial and arm monoparesis, which resolved. Follow-up MRI scan showed that the leuco white matter changes disappeared. We often see this laser-related, the perilesional area. There is a significant white matter hyperintensity. It's almost like a transient leukoencephalopathy kind of a thing. So it's a risky business, and so that's why we have not been very aggressive about trying to take these cases. Other than that, we haven't done, I think the Barrow was primarily doing the gamma knife radiation for these patients. I'm not aware of mTOR inhibitors. I will leave it to others, but it's a fascinating location with fascinating connectivity and remarkable phenotype of epilepsy.
So this Pallister Hall syndrome, have you come across any patient since, it is often an MCQ for which I keep for my sort of the residents.
Frequent on the boards, I guess. As I
Yeah.
said, we see we have very, very few cases in our.
It's quite surprising that people know that Cleveland don't take up hypothalamic hamartomas, and so you don't get any reference, or is it because the Barrow is so well established that it straight goes out there?
These are very rare conditions, as you can see. Maybe there are 1,000 cases over a few years, and since they're extremely rare, they always search for which center is the primary. If they are giving us a call, we probably send them to Barrows. Nowadays, I think everybody is using laser. It's probably everybody is trying to do some laser there.
That will mess up the whole thing. I think so. From the limited experience we have, then we can't either go for surgery or tell them no. Both are not possible. So that is a patient I was telling. But we have almost around more than 20 or more patients in the last 20 years. So that is something which is very surprising. There are many centers in India also, as you know, but we had that number, which I think doesn't tally with the incidence. I mean, they say that it's 1 to 2 per 20, 200,000 and all, and then we see so much. So I don't know whether ethnicity or something has to do with something. Yeah. Anyway, coming back to the radiological thing, because I want to wind it up there, because the surgeons are so much inclined to divide them into 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if the speakers want to take it up, they can, or otherwise Ram will be elaborating on that, because we often have discussions on that. And that takes you to the last question also. When the lesion is very large and like a pituitary adenoma, which has a suprasellar extension, this can mimic that. So how will you differentiate that? And what is the optic chiasm? What happens to the optic chiasm in an hamartoma versus a pituitary adenoma? Whether it's pushed down or up or laterally, that is also a point which our radiologist always says that is a very important point to distinguish that. So any one of the speakers wants to take it up, then you are welcome to do that. Otherwise, I would request Ram, because we are looking into a series. Yes, Anish, Chandra, Suresh, anyone? Yes, Ram, you can make Ram, please start.
He's not there, ma'am.
He's not there, he left. Oh my God. Then I think somebody was classifying it, the De La Lande classification, vertical, horizontal, lateral, and then a large expansile one. So you should have brought 4 MRI pictures of that, otherwise people won't understand. So the last question is, how do you differentiate it from the last question which I asked? Who want to take it? Yes, Suresh. The grade 4 or the large hypothalamic lesions can extend into the pituitary fossa and also even paracellular region. And then you have to distinguish it from pituitary adenomas again, because the precocious puberty and stuff like that can come in that. Having said that, the spell check should be done, especially Sunish. Precocious is PRECOCIUS. Although you have to be precautious, but it is
No, actually,
cautious.
I corrected it. Maybe
Yeah, no
the
problem,
whole
no problem. I know that it is a typo, but precautious means pre means early. Cautious means the ability that comes up earlier. That is the word meaning of that. So, yeah, how to distinguish? You can just briefly tell. Who's going to take that? So, one of the senior PDFs, Deepak, Kalyani, Gopal. I can see few names here. I'm calling out those names. Joseph is here, who is the imaging specialist in the epileptology group. Yes, Joseph.
I have no clue.
So there is a
Madam, don't
yeah. Tell me. Yes,
know.
Kalyani.
Don't know. Don't know. Don't know.
Oh
Don't
my
know,
God.
madam.
This is Kalyani Musaji. You give her a tick and she keeps on having this giggling phenomenon. So she's called a status gelasticus lady. So she's the right person. You can hear her giggling, no?
Yes, yes, yeah.
I
We texted back through
don't know the
WhatsApp.
answer.
I knew.
Kalyani, stop it now.
So
Okay.
we often have to caution her to stop giggling, but she's one of the bright epileptologists we ever had. The question that Vijay and Keshav usually ask is if the epicenter of the lesion suprasellar. That is a question number one. The epicenter of the hypothalamic lesion is the suprasellar, whereas that of pituitary adenoma is intrasellar. So that is what they keep teaching. And whether they expand inside the cellar, that is the second question, and obviously you know the answer. And whether the lesion is extraaxial or intraaxial, that is the third question which you have to ask. And the last one, what happens to the optic asum? And they say that in majority of series or whatever radiology series they have, the optic asum is pushed inferiorly by the hypothalamic hamartoma. It's almost always the case. Why and all those questions, I'm not the right person to answer, but you can go and read about that. So is there any other question remaining? Rajesh, what about your experience? The very confident pediatric epileptologist who say that adult epileptologists are duffers, dumb. Is he here? Rajesh? Gone? Okay, fine. So anyone else who would like to? Rajesh? Rajesh, are you here? Any information on stereo EEG ablation of hypothalamic hamartoma? What is that?
No, see,
Stereo EEG?
yeah. See, if we can put in a stereo EEG electrode inside, like
Okay.
what Musa was telling, like the laser therapy.
Uh-huh.
No, like you cauterize the hematoma. Has somebody thought of doing anything like that? Because it seems to be technically feasible.
I don't think you can call it a stereo EEG there. Of course, we are doing a stereo EEG recording intraoperatively for all our patients. That's a different issue. But here, what he meant was a laser ablation, where they use the sort of electrodes which on the laser therapy. That's a different one.
That's a
But
different electrode, right? We
yeah.
don't have that. We don't have laser
Stereo
facilities.
EEG means what can
No,
you?
the routine stereo EEG electrode is there. No, you put it inside and burn it off. Cauterize through that. Has anybody tried that? It is very practically simple. Hardly it costs anything.
I understand, Rajesh, but how to cauterize? You tell me through the
You
stereo
can
EEG
burn it off.
electrode.
No? Yeah, you can burn it off. Like you cauterize the what you do? You do the radio frequency ablation. No.
Okay.
Similarly, you can do that. No, has anybody tried that? Like you cauterize burn the epileptogenic circuitry by radio frequency ablation. Make small holes. Has anybody
And that
thought
is
of
what
that?
they meant by radio frequency ablation. When you already have that technique, I don't know whether the same stereo EEG electrodes have been tried for that. I'm not aware of that. Somebody can correct me.
I
We have
think,
any answer?
Rajesh, that's the same as laser, right? You are
Yeah,
tactically
interstitial therapy of laser. Yeah.
whatever the device there, probe there, and burning it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's cautery. You probably need a much more technically sophisticated thing that is hitting the tip of that, whatever the thing. That's what laser is. I thought. We have a stereo EEG followed by laser surgeries. That's what we do. We take out the stereo EEG electrodes immediately after the evaluation and put the laser trajectory in that, probe inside that, and burn it. Not for hamartoma, I'm talking about other laser surgeries.
Yeah, so we don't have that laser facility with us. So if we can cauterize through the stereo EEG contacts, will that give a sufficient diameter? I'm not very sure because it hardly cauterizes 5 millimeter size. So
laser is tricky. Laser itself is tricky. Laser gives a map, intraoperative map about how much is heating outside happens. That is not perfect. It's not, of course, this is kind of a different level of innovation that needs to be cleared at several different levels. I like the way you're thinking to make it laser easily available for everybody, or a technique similar to laser available for everybody.
The Japanese series and all, they do a lot of laser thermocoagulation, and they say that their outcome is as good as resection. So that's what I know about laser. Electrodes are different, and I mean, I don't know whether they can call it electrodes, but they are not stereo EEG electrodes. You can make a trajectory through stereo EEG, but in these days of operative MR and ultrasonogram and all, I don't think whether a trajectory need to be made by stereo EEG. We use intraoperative MRI and ultrasound these days. So anyone else? Otherwise, yes, Kalyani.
Yeah. Rajesh sir, I don't know about hypothalamic hamartoma, but what we know is, yes, for laser, we do stereo EEG, take the electrode out and use a separate probe for laser, like thermo ablation. But for radio frequency ablation, stereo EEG is kept in situ. Then we, as you said, radio frequency ablation can be done using the same stereo EEG electrodes. And then after ablation, we can continue doing the stereo EEG, and we can actually demonstrate that the seizures have disappeared after the ablation. And that's what is the advantage of radio frequency ablation over laser, because your electrode is still there and you can actually prove electrographically that the seizures have vanished. But I don't know about hypothalamic as such. In other places, we can use the SEEG for radio frequency.
Yes, I completely agree with that. So with that, can we wind up? So it was an interesting session, and I think Musaji will agree that the speakers were very crisp and clear, and they haven't tried to allude to the whole paraphernalia of hypothalamic hamartoma. So that was a very good session. All three of the speakers did very well. So thank you so much. And next month we'll be seeing on August 15th. Not that it is Independence Day, because it's a Saturday. Same time, 6 to 7 p.m. So thank you all. Yes, Musaji, you want to make a comment? I can see your mouth open. Yeah, Tata. See you. And thanks everybody for joining. Nayak sir is here and so many other people. Venkateshwarlu sir was here. Thanks to all the teachers for your kind attendance in most of our sessions and making it rather more interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you all.